Hola and welcome to a new episode of the Roofless Dog and Pony Show. My name is Julio Panicello. I am the dream alchemist at Roofless Painters, and we have changed the day of the episode just because tomorrow we're going to be chatting about the fall book that we're reading, and we thought it would be best if we don't make that chat and the episode coincide. So that's why we just moved it back a little bit earlier, but at the same time we're a little bit delayed. But anyhow, so here we are. I think it's episode 82, I believe, episode 82. And so yeah, we're gonna actually present the concept behind the final painting collection of 2022. We have done, I believe, 17. Is it 17? Yes, this will be our 17th collection. So this year we started 2022 and we decided that we were going to slow down a little bit, and instead of doing one collection per week, which is what we usually did for years, we were going to stretch it up a little bit and take a bit more time to dedicate or to elevate the work. And it worked really wonderfully. We were able to actually get deeper into the practice and spend a little bit more time. We have like better paintings this year. So we decided to actually, on this last day of November, before we open the last month of the year tomorrow, to actually present the concept behind the collection and work on it for maybe a couple of weeks, and then spend the remainder of the year, which is usually the time people take to travel and to hang out and then to sort of like see family, to do open studios so we can catch up and try to finish up any paintings that may be still pending or not truly completed. Nothing is truly finished, but we try to complete stages. So we do it twice a year. We do it during the summer, early summer weeks when everyone starts traveling, and then we take 3 to 4 weeks to catch up, and then we started doing it last year. Actually, we're gonna take our winter break, or winter studio, winter painting break. But anyhow, so we're here because with each episode, we start a new painting collection, presenting the theme. Every time we start a new project, we come up with a theme that is between specific, but at the same time open to interpretation. And these presentations serve as the beginning of the collection. We reveal the theme of the painting collection so you can find out what will be painting. I don't even know how to read next, and also the reason why. We hope that gives you or entices you to either join us in person or remotely, or perhaps we are able to spark your curiosity about the creative process, the concept behind it, and maybe you start seeing around you images or paintings that are related to what we are talking about every couple of weeks. It usually happens like that. It's very serendipitous. But anyhow, whether you're painting with us or just being curious and wanting to learn more, this is how we start every collection. We explore different possibilities for visual representation of the concept, using images of paintings throughout art history as inspiration, while citing stylistic and historical references. We have put together a few images that we hope are a little bit related. It was a little bit hard this time, but we think the images will actually be okay. So yeah, we generally pick a few images to illustrate that throughout art history, the subject matter has been dealt with by painters in different locations, in different centuries, in different decades, and done in different styles. And the reason for that is just to reinforce the idea that this subject or concept has a history, but also mostly to provide a range of painting executions that are different enough so you feel like you have a space. You feel you have a space. Hi, Nan. To also paint your own. So, all right. So I think this was like pretty much a really long introduction, and I only have a few more minutes. But we were obviously, maybe I'll start with this image right here. We were really reading a lot or trying to find images about the protests that have been happening in China starting this past Friday, and which we are completely fascinated. I don't know if the word fascinated, it's a good word. We are interested in learning more. We want to make sure that we receive as much information as possible, especially because all the news are coming from a place in the world where everything is very censored. So, we started learning about the reasons why, the tragedy that happens, the fact that people have been dealing with this for years, this suppression, this repression, and the spark that exploded or triggered all the protests. By the way, we have discovered this artist who has been doing this kind of work for a very long time. This is not the actual cover. It is the actual cover of the New York Times, and it's not. There is an artist named Sho Shibuya. He is from Japan, and he currently lives and works and creates artwork in New York City. And he's been doing this for a very long time. What he does, and he has a graphic design background. What he does is take an actual New York Times paper. So he actually works with the physical paper, the New York Times. And then, the work has been evolving. I'm not sure exactly what medium he uses, but what he does is using the pretext of this is the cover of the New York Times, which somewhat, not anymore, but somewhat people consider as the most important sort of like source of information or credible. This is, in our opinion, far gone. The New York Times has fallen, deep, but that's, reason for another conversation. But anyhow, we would just wanted to show our opinion and share our opinion. But at some point, the New York Times was the epitome of reliable sources of news. I would argue that it stopped being like that in 2016. And they really screwed up many times, enough times not to give them the benefit of the doubt in my book. But anyhow, the artist uses the cover of the New York Times, and then he paints over. So he removes hi Marie, he removes all the words and letters and articles, and then he creates a painting over the New York Times cover. So when you see the image that he posts, you think that the New York Times, the editorial team, the design team behind the New York Times did this, when in fact they didn't. They should hire him because he does a much better job than the New York Times at actually presenting these amazing covers that he creates. So in this cover for this, and he does it like every day. He has a daily practice. He's been doing this for at least 5 years. He's evolving and his artwork is evolving. He used to cover parts of the New York Times and now it's the whole thing. But this is not the New York Times doing this. It's an artist who creates it. But I'm spending too much time explaining myself. The idea is that to explain what happened this past weekend in China, he used like a blue sky or blue background with a graded or gradation, and then a single piece of like paper, a blank paper. And the reason is because in China, starting on last Friday, it's not the first time that this is being done, by the way, because there's a history of people using paper to protest. But people have been in China since Friday have been holding blank pieces of paper as a symbol, a visual symbol, to protest against all the repression. It's not just the COVID measures. It's much more than that, and the tragedy that happened with the people that got killed in the fire and all the awful things and the censorship. But people have no choice because the government has this massive surveillance undertaking in society. They're able to keep social media off their hands, and the social media that they are able to use is highly controlled. So there's a massive effort to scrub anything that remotely calls for any kind of like dissent. So in the absence of ways to express dissent, people are holding blank pieces of paper. So we thought that for this final painting collection of 2022, we have collected images that are continuously being posted on social media, but also scrubbed. It's actually happening in real time. If you do a Google search of white paper, just white paper, depending on where you are and what browser you use to do the Google search and what search engine you use, you will find images of protesters, maybe a few, not that many, or you will find origami pictures, or you will find absolutely nothing. So the reach of this censorship, it's not only contained in China, it just goes beyond that society. But the idea is that we're collecting images of people in China protesting, holding sheets of white paper. They call it the white. There's not a specific name right now, but the title of this piece, by the way, by Sho Shibuya, is A4 Revolution, and that's one of the hashtags that is being used. White paper is also being used, but the idea would be to just use images of protesters holding white paper and then create a painting. We want to document what's happening. We want to also promote and build on the voices of people that are trying to let the message out and spread it and can't because they're being arrested or they're being erased. And anyhow, so I have prepared a few images, and maybe I'll just show you some images from mostly like 19th century and early 20th century. These images that we found, we usually, when we bring up a concept, we try to illustrate the concept with some examples of people that have used either the same concept or similar concepts throughout art history. So we couldn't find any images of people using white paper, holding white paper as a form or a symbol to protest or dissent. But there are plenty of images of figures, specifically female figures, holding white paper for other purposes. So even though the images we're going to show are not examples of visual examples of people protesting or using white paper as a dissent, they're mostly misogynistic views on women's bodies and feelings. They do sort of like have, we hope they do have some sort of like, in a weird way, a parallel between the real concept that we're trying to put forward, painting protesters holding white paper in order to talk about this protest revolution, but at the same time, and at the same time, kind of like spread their voices and make sure that more people know why this is happening and why people are using, this form of protest. But anyhow, so here are the images. All right, I'm just gonna, don't come at us, but I'm just gonna sort of like, well, first of all, these are images that come from social media and other journalists that are in the country right now trying to document what's happening, and of people currently this weekend holding white pieces of paper, and so some of these images we'll use in universities, mostly young people. It's always in educational institutions. People hate people being educated and I forgot if it was either Iran or China, but they are shutting down universities just because they want to prevent young people from actually using clever ways of expressing their dissent. But this will be the idea and some of the image references. Anyhow, I'm going to start with this painting. This has nothing to do conceptually, but maybe has like a little bit of a parallel visually. I love this painting. It's by Goya, the Spanish painter. This is most of the images of women holding white paper. In some paintings you can read the images or the messages on the white paper. In other paintings it's just white paper, but it's kind of like a similar concept. So Goya, do I have internet connection right now? Oh my gosh, I hope I do. Yes, I do. Anyhow, so these are two women. This was painted, let me just go back to the date, but was it 1800? Somewhere in the 1800s. Anyhow, of all the images, I would say, I have no internet. How's that? Of all the images that, here we go. Maybe I do have. That we found, to me, this is possibly one of the most interesting visually, just because a young woman with a letter, Francisco de Goya. This was painted between 1812 and 1819. Goya's paintings are incredible for many reasons, not just because politically he was, in a way, able to do both things, document the court, and at the same time talk about political issues, which was incredibly rare in his context. All painting was a commodity of the rich and powerful, and that was it. It was not understood that painting was something that people used to express themselves and their emotions. That was not happening at the time. And also, what wasn't happening at the time is a painter just taking the narrative in their own hands and just using painting as a language to pedagogically send a message out to other people, contemporary people living at the same time. It didn't happen. But he was able to do it. I have no idea how that happened and how much of an influence he had in people of power to make sure that they wouldn't persecute him and have any consequences. But anyhow, so that's why some of the images are also, the style of painting was kind of revolutionary, because there was a very early naturalism in his work that was loose and it wasn't stiff, and that didn't resurface until much later in the century. But he was able to do it in a way that now feels incredibly revolutionary. Love this painting compositionally. The two figures, the little dog, you maybe cannot see it, but there's a little dog at the bottom of the painting. And there's a woman, there's a figure, there's a person holding a white paper, and inquisitively. There are a lot of Easter eggs in the paintings that we're showing. Some Easter eggs are good, some Easter eggs are rotten, just because they emphasize this idea of women as being damsels and ready to be rescued, and also a combination of the fragility and being defenseless and half naked, some of them. So male gaze, peak male gaze in these images. So just making sure that we provide all the context. But anyhow, we just bring it up because stylistically there are different examples of people holding paper, and we found that this was one of them. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to interject some of these traditional paintings, and then at the same time read some bits on articles that explain the origins or why people have used or are using white paper, because I found some really interesting stuff, and I just think it would be nice to bring it in the fold. The white paper trend became popular among protesters in Hong Kong in 2020, after the city implemented a nebulous and sweeping national security law passed by Beijing days earlier. So this is not something that was invented right now, but they took inspiration, young people took inspiration on the same form of protest that happened two years ago. In those hoping to openly criticize the government have inevitably turned to creative means in the absence of legitimate channels to air their unhappiness. The anonymous sharing of protest posters over Apple's iPhone AirDrop feature and graffiti in public restrooms where there are no cameras were among recent attempts. So because this algorithms AI that it's used as a weapon of mass destruction or mass repression, people are just finding it different outlets. And one of them is using the feature on Apple, the AirDrop feature, to actually share, disseminate information. I think there was an article regarding someone in the Chinese government trying to disable that, and Apple trying to deal diplomatically with that feature. Maybe they're going to disable that feature in China so people cannot disseminate information. But public restrooms, another place where there are no CCTV cameras or whatever that you call them, the entire country is infested. It's funny because, and I know that some of you are watching this from the UK, it's funny because societies are becoming much more surveillanced, if that word exists. So yeah, this is what happens when a society gets too much surveillance, in the name of crime and safety. What happens is that people cannot disseminate information as easily as they and creatively as they want to. So yeah, a couple of bits about this, and then I'm gonna go to the next painting. This one, a lot of French painters and a lot of Italian painters, by the way, of women holding white paper. A young woman reading a love letter by Pietro Antonio Conte Rotari, who lived between 1707 and 1762, a century earlier. Also very unusual for that time to do a painting of somebody anonymous. Painting was understood, again, as a symbol of power and wealth, and everyone who was able to commission a painting made sure that they feature them in a position of power. So all the people in famous paintings are well known. For an artist to actually do something out of a commission or non-commissioned work in which they would depict somebody unknown, it was not very common. But anyhow, we just thought that this was an interesting... This was a little bit of a different Easter egg. She's not defenseless, kind of like the same as Goya 100 years after. But it was also very uncommon to feature women smiling in paintings. Smiling was considered indecent for a woman. Women in paintings were not depicted smiling because essentially... between smiling and being a prostitute, it was essentially one step. So there was a lot of backlash when people depicted women with a smile, let alone showing teeth. That was might as well show other parts of the body. But so it's interesting to see this composition. She's inquisitively reading the letter. She's not emotionally affected by it. It is a love letter, so it's a lot of women depicted in paintings holding love letters in the 19th century were completely devastated. You see women in couches and in beds and holding their heads. But perhaps like 100 years before that happened, there was more of like the romance involved and not the heartache and the heartbreak. So this is definitely one example of that. In our opinion, in our view, we have no idea of what the artist intended. We prepared for this, but not that much. Okay, so we rely on our own interpretation. So yeah, there's something really nice about this inquisitiveness and relish. She's relishing about what the letter contains, and sort of like a little bit of a smile. So yeah, and I'm gonna sort of like talk about other statements or other pieces that we found. This is a really good article, actually, in the Washington Examiner. And it talks about, let me just read the, another interesting fold to the idea of holding blank page, protesters in China holding blank pages. White has a double meaning of being a popular funeral color in China. Blank white paper is understood by many in the country to be a symbol of mourning for those lost due to the lockdowns. The New York Times reported specifically the deaths of the 10 residents of an apartment building in Xinjiang after it caught fire last week are being blamed by many on lockdown measures, trapping the residents in the inferno. So the white paper, it's not just this idea of showing dissent by showing something that has nothing on it, yet everyone understands. There's so many implications about, a blank piece of paper. There's no message, and yet everybody knows what that means. But in addition to that, some people pointed out the fact that the actual color of the page, white, has a symbolism associated with mourning. And considering that one of the triggers, it wasn't the only one, but one of the triggers was the horrible death of those 10, we listened to reports this past weekend that's not even the accurate number of people who died. Some people allegedly mentioned up to 40 people that got killed in that fire. So they're not reporting the accurate numbers, and they haven't reported anything accurately anyhow. So, but yeah, another thing that was interesting, this kind of holding the or a color associated with symbolism. Hazel Liu, 29, a film producer who attended a vigil in Beijing on Sunday. I'm surprised that they mentioned a name here. Described the meaning of the white papers to the outlet as meaning, quote, "We are the voiceless, but we are also powerful," end quote. Again, quote, "People have a common message." This was said by an internet freedom researcher at the University of California in Berkeley, who told the New York Times, "They know what they want to express, and authorities know too, so people don't need to say anything. If you hold a blank sheet, then everyone knows what you mean." So that's something also that we immediately connected and loved. The idea that sometimes you need a universal symbol to spread a universal message. Because, sometimes language could be an obstacle, or it could be not an obstacle, but it's a barrier. If you want to disseminate a message, and you want to disseminate a message to as many people as possible, you have to use a symbol that can become so universal that you don't need language to decipher or explain. You need something that immediately captures everyone's attention, and at the same time, everyone understands what it means. So that's the beauty of what they did. This is not the full painting, but I'm going to show you a couple of paintings of, yes, maybe a century later, but this is the maybe it's a heartache. I'm not sure if it's a heartache or not. If you can see, it's a gorgeous room. The painting is much bigger, but the way it's cropped on the video, doesn't make justice. Luigi Rossi, Italian, young woman reading. Doesn't look like a book, but anyhow, so it looks like a white paper, and that's why we chose it. Painted in 1875. The artist lived between 1846 and 1913, and this is a opulent, rich room with Persian rugs and Chinoise motifs, or Japanese. I'm sorry, I'm just getting confused, and that's terrible. But yeah, there was a Japanese trend. I don't even know if that's an appropriate term to use, Japanism. I have no idea. But it was en vogue at the time. One of the many sort of like cultural appropriations that a lot of European countries with histories of colonization used and incorporated in their own culture, and never made any references of where that cultural motif came from or who started it. maybe that was appropriate to contextualize Japanism with how it was used, and that happens with a lot of trans-Africanism, and even the word that it's actually not okay maybe to say primitivism, but it was considered, an art movement. Anyhow, so there's a figure holding a paper, and so again, conceptually, this is the opposite of what we're trying to do with this collection of paintings. Just painting protesters in China holding blank pieces of paper, or anyone holding a piece of paper, a blank piece of paper. But we use paintings sometimes in better ways to illustrate how this, maybe not the concept, but the subject has been used before by other painters, and that's a good example. And she is, the peak male gaze right here. She is not holding decent posture, and I don't know if she's. It looks to me like she's enjoying herself reading that. It's not a piece of paper. It's not a letter, but she's definitely having a great time. Anyhow, and then I'm just gonna mention a couple of other pieces, or I have just one more. Okay, so this is another article, and the article from the CBC News. I don't even know, but quote, people can, from Ten Biao, I don't know exactly who that person, it's in the article, but anyhow, he said, or she said, they said people can read behind the blank paper, the anger, the dissatisfaction, and the desire for democracy and freedom. Everything is already there. Oh, yes, they are a Chinese human rights activist, lawyer, and academic living in exile in the U.S. So another example. So I'm just going to bring another example of visually. This is the same artist. He was into this. Oh no, it's a different Italian artist. But there was this trend of like this. We're getting into the trend of more objectification, because this was Auguste Tolmouche, I'm assuming French, The Love Letter, 1883. We're at the end of the 1800s, and definitely here there is, it's an open letter. Is it heartbreak? Is it love? Is it young love? I don't know. But the idea is to just kind of like portray a figure, in this case a female figure, defenseless and taken by the words of the letter. And also, this is perfectly, it's not on your face, but she's not facing us. We can see her back. We can see her arm all the way to the shoulder. So there is definitely this male gaze, this objectification of the body in very subtle ways. Everything's also very luxurious and opulent. There's also the Japanism trend coming in and sort of like painting these rich fabrics and sheen and gowns. And so a definite bias in depicting a figure holding a piece of paper. The letter is not even open. I mean, I could see the little seal, the little wax seal on the middle. Can you see the red dot? It's a little tiny thing there. She's not even reading the letter, and she's already sort of like getting overwhelmed with all this emotion. Total male gaze in action right here. So these images, obviously, they were very popular. They were very, they had a lot of commercial value. People just wanted to collect images of women completely overwhelmed with emotion with pieces of paper or letters. And going back to any other pieces, any other, let me just see if there's any other. Oh yeah, so in China, protesters believed the blank pages could provide some cover if they were detained by police, Tang said. After all, what could possibly be political about a piece of paper with nothing on it? If you have a banner or a paper with words like "Down with the Communist Party" or "Down with Xi" or something like that, then it becomes extremely dangerous. But when it's a blank piece of paper, then there's nothing on it. So I think that's the reason why they're so effective. These protests are so effective, and they found a way to disseminate, or they're trying to, because again, the internet censors are going bonkers, trying to scrub any connection between the words protest and white paper. Do the test and try to Google white paper and see. Depending on where you are, you'll be surprised what you get. A lot of origami, but they're trying to suppress images, because that's what actually brings brings consciousness to a movement. It's when a lot of people know about it and sympathize and stand behind it. So the efforts here are to suppress the message and stop dissemination and stop the exchange. And they have powerful tools. I think it's partly the country that has the most powerful tools to filter out, scrub, delete, remove with impunity any images with people holding white pages. So, and just gonna a little bit more modern. This is like another example. Let me see if I have the title. I think it's 1924. A Spanish painter, and this was a little bit more in the modernist style, I would say. Jordi Vilarrufas, a Spanish painter born in 1924. He was born in 1924. Lectura, portrait of a woman holding a letter. It's not a famous painting. We found this in a auction website, not really big and major, an auction website that collects minor work. I hate this word, but work that it's not as expensive, I guess. But as long as it's signed and there's a reference between the author or the painter and then maybe a history or other painters that were sold in other perhaps auction houses, then the paintings have more value. So yeah, not a famous painter, not a major painting, but an interesting example, a little bit more contemporary. I think I'm just going to leave it here. Again, this is what we're doing this week. We're starting our final painting collection of 2022, our 17th. So this is going to be our final collection. We are using images of people holding blank pieces of paper inspired by the protests that happened in China starting this past Friday, of people coming up with creative ways to bypass censorship and repression, and using a symbol that is simple, universal, and explains a lot of things. And holding a piece of blank paper does it. And that's what we're going to do, because we're going to learn more about it. Some people join our workshops and they just don't paint. They just want to just join and kind of like participate in the process at the same time that we do a thorough step-by-step process, and we explain what we do and why we do it, and how we use materials. We also bring in mini reflections or dissertations or tiny essays about things that we're learning collectively of the concept that we're proposing. So join us Friday. This will be our last painting collection. I said that a million times, but and then we're going to take the remainder sessions of the year to just revisit any of the work that we may have started since January 2022, but perhaps we have yet to complete. So we did it during summertime when people traveled, and we're going to do it also during the holiday month, because it's kind of like a really hard month to balance travel, family, and painting. It's only $20. Again, Friday, 11 a.m. Pacific time. People join us from different parts of the world. It's 3 hours, 2 hours painting, 1 hour of exchanging ideas after that. And we hope you found this, hold on one second, this presentation useful. And what else? I was going to mention something. We're going to title this white paper. Okay, thank you. And thanks, by the way, if you're still here and watching this, we really appreciate it, and you joining us. And if you have any comments, please, you can just post them either right now or when the post goes up on Instagram. And we're going to try to put also this as a podcast so people can actually listen. People do listen to this as podcasts, believe it or not. So there you go. All right. Thank you.